my interest is to prove to people that they have within their reach all the tools necessary to make significant changes in their bodies or in their lives. And I now know that if you give people that information based on science and you combine a little quantum physics with a little neuroscience, with a little neuroendocrinology, with a little psychoneuroimmunology, the mind-body connection, and you throw in some epigenetics, that all of those sciences point the finger at possibility. And as we learn new information, we make new connections in our brain. There's physical evidence when we learn something that is left in our brain, footprints of consciousness that reflect our interaction in the environment. But if learning is making those connections, then remembering is being able to maintain them and sustain them. So I now know if you give them the right information, and then they can turn to the person next to them and they can explain it. If they can explain that information and create a model of understanding, they're beginning to install the neurological hardware in their brain in preparation for an experience. So the more people understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, the how gets easier. About 12 years ago, I was in this movie called What the Bleep Do We Know? And in that movie, we made the effort to combine many different principles and theoretical science to begin to teach people that their thoughts have something to do with their life, and to show them that if they applied the principles, they could begin to produce changes in their world. One of the most common questions we got as a result of the movie is, how do we do it? How do we begin to make measurable changes in our lives? And if our personality creates our personal reality, and we have to change our personality in order to change our personal reality, why is it so hard to change? And I thought those questions were really great questions because people were more interested in understanding to take those principles and really begin to apply them. So I started teaching these conferences and workshops around the world, and at the same time I was writing my second book called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And what made my second book different than my first book was in the second book I gave people some of the tools to use to begin to practice the inner work and make internal changes in the way they thought and the way they felt, and to see if it produced changes in their outer world or in their body or in their lives. And what I did was I took some of the ideas and principles in studying spontaneous remissions from diseases that I had researched years before when I wrote my first book, and I thought, well gosh, if it worked on sick people, maybe it could work on well people. Principles of personal change and transformation that I learned from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that were treating both conventionally and unconventionally, and they were staying the same or getting worse, and all of a sudden got better. I thought, well, if it worked for them, it should be able to work for other people, and we should be able to replicate the process. In the first couple years after that movie, we didn't see much change in people's lives. But people always wanted more information, and we kept teaching those workshops and conferences, and then all of a sudden, the magic started happening. In fact, people started to heal by thought alone. And because we were seeing so many significant changes, I assembled a team of researchers and scientists to begin to measure those changes.
3 types of stress: physical, chemical, and emotional. Physical stress, trauma, accidents, injuries, falls. Chemical stress, toxins, pollutants, heavy metals, blood sugar levels, viruses, bacteria, mold. And then there's emotional stress, which has everything to do with raising kids and second mortgages and single parenting and time, and all of those different elements knock the brain and body out of balance. And the emotional component has always been the challenging one for most people, because you could be in a constant state of fear, and consciously or unconsciously, it doesn't matter the food you eat, it won't matter the type of exercise you do. If you're living in fear, the body is not in any state for growth and repair. So we have to face this one important element, and this is a time now where we have to be greater than our fear.
Networks, the brain makes a chemical, and that chemical is called a feeling or an emotion. And the moment they start to feel whole or unlimited or empowered or invincible or compassionate or have a love for life, now they're teaching their body chemically to understand what their mind is intellectually understood. So we can say that knowledge is for the mind and experience is for the body. And in that moment, they're embodying the truth of that philosophy. And now the research shows that genes don't create disease. It's a fact that it's the environment that signals the gene that begins to change its expression. Well, the end product of an experience is called an emotion. So when a person begins to feel the emotion from the experience, they're literally rewriting their biological program and signaling new genes in new ways. And genes are like Christmas tree lights. They're turning on and off all the time. So the moment the person starts to have a new experience, that's new information. And in that moment, they can literally downregulate a gene for disease and upregulate a gene for health. We've measured it. So then that's great. Doing it once means that you should be able to do it again. So we start off with theory. We start off with philosophy. We start off with intellectual knowledge. But as people begin to share that information, if you can't explain that model to me, then it's not wired in your brain. But if you can explain it now, the process of repeating it and understanding it is firing and wiring new circuits in the brain. Now the person is priming their brain for a future event. If I can set up the conditions in the environment and give people the proper instructions, and they can get their behaviors to match their intentions, their actions equal to their thoughts, if they can get their mind and body working together, they're going to have a new experience. Now, the experience of what they're having, embracing in that moment, enriches the philosophical circuits in the brain. More connections are laid down to what experience does.
Because I think this is a time in history where it's not enough to know. This is a time in history to know how. And if you rewind the tape 10 years ago, you know, information was the thing that stimulated thought, stimulated new ideas, and as we learn new things, we make new connections in our brains. So as we begin to add new stitches into that three-dimensional tapestry in our mind, we're beginning to cause our mind to function in new ways. But the key then is to apply it, to personalize it, to do something with it. And 10 years ago, when I got in front of an audience and talked about the application, nobody wanted to step outside that philosophical, theoretical, intellectual realm, right? Because when doing something is I think we're in an age of information. And in an age of information, ignorance is a choice. And because of technology, we have access to so much content. And information creates awareness. And awareness is consciousness. And you can't have consciousness without energy. They work together. So there's an energetic change, I think, that's taking place in the world right now, where people are so informed that old models, old paradigms are beginning to break down, whether it's the medical model, the religious model, the educational model, journalism, the economy, politics. It's all beginning to come to the surface because something else has to come out. And I think that one of the things that people are realizing is that you don't have to be a Buddhist monk to do this, or a nun with 40 years of devotion. You just got to understand the formula. And just like any skill or anything you learn, you got to go from thinking to doing to being. You got to take knowledge, you create the experience, and if you keep doing it over and over again, you start getting the skill, or you start getting wise about how to do it. And you know that you know how to do it. Common people around the world are doing the uncommon, and they are becoming supernatural. And because they're becoming supernatural, show people how to heal by thought alone, and then it led to this whole breakthrough of measurements and changes in our objective scientific findings that transcended really common understanding of what could happen to a person. I want you to know that you have within your reach all the machinery to begin to connect to this field of intelligence. You'll learn how to organize your autonomic nervous system and create more wholeness and balance in your body. You'll be able to understand what it means to get beyond yourself and ultimately create a new future. So think about this. If you spend the majority of your day focusing on matter, focusing on everything in this three-dimensional world that's made of material things, it begs the question, how much of your time and your attention do you put on that unified field? That invisible field of information that exists beyond space and time. Let's stop telling the story of your past and let's start telling the story of your future. And people who aren't defined by a vision of the future, for the most part, are left with memories of the past. Your brain is a record of the past. It's an artifact of everything you've learned and experienced in this moment. So most people wake up in the morning and
they start thinking about their problems.
Yeah.
And those problems are memories that are tattooed in the brain that are associated to certain people and things at certain times and places. So the moment the person wakes up clean slate, they start thinking about the problems they're thinking in the past. If you believe your thoughts have something to do with your destiny, well, there's a possibility that your past is going to be your future. Every one of those problems has an emotion associated with it. So then the moment you start recalling the problem, you start feeling unhappy. Now your body's in the past, because thoughts are the language of the brain and feelings are the language of the body, and how you think and how you feel creates a state of being. So people reaffirm their identity based on the past, right?